Imagine you believe God literally lives in one building, the holiest place on earth. Now imagine watching that building burn to the ground. Where did God go? In 586 BCE, Babylon destroyed the Jerusalem temple. For ancient Israelites, this wasn't just a military defeat, it was a cosmic catastrophe. The temple was God's address. Its destruction should have meant Yahweh was either powerless or gone forever. But one priest prophet, already exiled to Babylon before the destruction, had seen something no one else had, God leaving the building on purpose and heading east. To understand what Ezekiel saw, we need to understand where he was standing and what he'd lost. Ezekiel was a priest trained in temple ritual and purity. The temple was the center of his entire worldview. In 597 BCE, Babylon carried out the first deportations before the final destruction, and Ezekiel was among those taken. He ended up in Babylon, living with other exiles beside the Sheba Canal, a priest without a temple, a holy man in an unclean land. And there, by that canal, he began receiving visions that would reshape the theology of Israel forever. First, a key term. The Kavod, spelled Kaf Bet Vav Dalet in Hebrew, is usually translated as glory, but it means something more concrete. God's visible, radiant presence, the luminous manifestation of the divine that was believed to dwell in the temple's inner sanctuary. In Ezekiel chapters 8 through 11, the prophet is transported in vision back to the Jerusalem temple. What he sees there is horrifying. Escalating abominations, idols set up at the gate, elders burning incense to images carved on the walls, women weeping for Tammuz, a Mesopotamian deity, men standing with their backs to the temple, bowing to the sun. The holiest place on earth has become a house of betrayal. These abominations justify what comes next. Divine executioners sweep through the city, and then the key moment. The Kavod, the luminous enthroned presence of God, begins to move. It rises from the cherubim in the inner sanctuary. It pauses at the threshold of the temple. It moves to the east gate, and then it ascends from the city entirely and stands on the hill east of Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives. The direction matters enormously. East, toward Babylon, toward the exiles. God didn't vanish. God didn't flee to heaven. God walked out of his own house and headed toward the people who'd been deported. The Kavod's departure isn't abandonment, it's relocation. God is going where his faithful people are. This vision draws on a tradition well known across the ancient Near East, the divine abandonment motif. When a city fell, people believed its patron god had left, usually fleeing to heaven in disgust, leaving the city defenseless against enemies. Texts like the lamentation over the destruction of describe exactly this pattern. Ezekiel knows this tradition, but he transforms it in two critical ways. First, Yahweh doesn't flee. He orchestrates the destruction himself. This isn't divine defeat, it's divine judgment. Second, Yahweh doesn't retire to heaven. He goes with the exiles. The destroyer and the companion are the same God. But Ezekiel didn't just see visions, he performed them with his own body. A prophetic sign act is a physical public performance by a prophet that enacts a divine message. Ezekiel's sign acts are extreme even by prophetic standards. First, he lies on his left side for 390 days, then his right side for 40 days, bound with ropes, symbolizing the years of Israel's and Judah's punishment. Over a year, immobilized in public. Second, he shaves his head and beard. For a priest, this is an act of shocking self-defilement. He divides the hair into thirds. 1/3 he burns, representing pestilence and famine. 1/3 he strikes with a sword, representing violence. 1/3 he scatters to the wind, representing exile. Only a few strands he tucks into his robe. That tiny handful is the remnant, the few who survive. These aren't metaphors written in a scroll. These are months-long public embodied performances witnessed by the exile community. Third, God commands Ezekiel to cook his food over human excrement, symbolizing the unclean food the besieged people of Jerusalem will eat. Ezekiel pushes back. In a rare moment of prophetic bargaining, he protests, "I have never defiled myself." God relents and allows cow dung instead. Fourth, and the most devastating, Ezekiel's wife dies. God commands him not to mourn. No weeping, no funeral rites, no outward grief. The meaning is crushing. Just as Ezekiel will not mourn his beloved, God will not mourn the loss of his own temple and the delight of his eyes. Ezekiel's body becomes the message. Alongside these sign acts, Ezekiel's rhetoric reaches an intensity unmatched in the Bible. He calls Jerusalem worse than Sodom. He compares the city to a useless vine fit only for burning. In chapters 16 and 23, he deploys extended metaphors of sexual promiscuity, God's destruction figured as the rage of a jealous husband. This language is among the most disturbing in Scripture. It reflects Ezekiel's priestly obsession with purity and defilement. In his framework, Jerusalem isn't just politically guilty, it's ritually contaminated beyond repair. The city has become so polluted that God's own presence cannot remain there. The Kavod had to leave. All of this, the visions, the sign acts, the searing rhetoric, was building toward one question. Would God come back? The book of Ezekiel doesn't end in exile. In his final vision, chapters 40 through 48, Ezekiel sees a restored, idealized temple, more perfect than anything that ever stood in Jerusalem. And then this. The presence of the God of Israel was coming from the east. The sound of his coming was like the sound of mighty waters, and the earth was lit up by his presence. The Kavod re-enters by the eastern gate, the same direction it departed, and fills the temple with radiant light. The circle closes. God left heading east. God returns from the east. The exile was not the end of the story. Pull back to the big picture. What Ezekiel accomplished was a theological revolution. Before the exile, Israelite religion was deeply place-bound. God lived in the temple, period. Destroy the temple, destroy the religion. Ezekiel's vision shattered that assumption. If God can leave his own house and walk into exile with his people, then worship, prayer, and divine relationship are possible anywhere. The single insight became foundational for everything that followed. It enabled worship in exile without a temple. It laid the groundwork for synagogue worship, a community gathered around prayer and the Torah study, no sacred building required. When Rome destroyed the Second Temple in 70 CE, Rabbinic Judaism survived precisely because this theological infrastructure was already in place. God is bound to a people, not a place. This idea that God's presence is portable, personal, and relational carried forward into Christianity and Islam as well. Every synagogue, every church, every mosque stands on the theological ground Ezekiel cleared in Babylon 26 centuries ago. Ezekiel watched God walk out of the most sacred building on earth and follow his people into the worst place they'd ever been. The temple could burn. The presence endured.